Okay, so the Browns dropped their fourth game in a row. We're at 4 now. I'm losing track. 4 games in a row. They lose to the Baltimore Ravens, 23-20. You know, it sucks to lose. Honestly, I found it to be an entertaining game, so I'm sort of conflicted here. It's certainly a change from the Patriots game, which was not nearly as fun. You get into that whole thing where losing is, you don't want to lose, and you don't like to lose in sort of painful fashion, but I always prefer to be able to talk about good things as well as the bad things. It certainly makes for a more interesting discussion. We are without Bree today, as she is buried in a number of things that she's dealing with. And we bring back the Emmanuel Classe of the Browns Bytes podcast. I did a baseball thing. That's about as much as I paid attention to the Guardians. I know his name. Abby Mueller's in for Bree tonight. As always, we're excited about that. So, Abby, where are we now with the Browns?
First of all, the Class A title is a great honor, so I very much appreciate the reference. He's a stud for sure. But in terms of the Browns, kind of where we're at right now, obviously, like you said, 4 straight. I feel like this loss wouldn't have hurt so badly if it wasn't 4 straight at this point, because like you said, there were positives and things we can build on. But the fact that it is another loss piling on a couple of rough weeks, I think almost makes it hurt a little more and harder to find some of those positives just because of where we're at this point in the season and really kind of within our division too.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's an opportunity to win in the division. You know, you want to beat the Ravens. Had they won that game, you're 3-4. You potentially are not preparing for the Bengals. You hurt the Ravens in the process. That's always good. And it's another game that was there to be had. Couldn't close the deal for any number of reasons. We'll get into. The thing that immediately jumps out to me is the call, the play of the game, which has gotten all kinds of scrutiny. 3rd and 2. Kevin Stefanski calls a play to take advantage of one-on-one matchup with Marcus Peters going to Amari Cooper. They get the look they want. They get everything they want. Amari Cooper pushes off unnecessarily, owns it later. You know, the penalty is really what hurts this. I think that has really sort of clouded people's judgment on this, because if it's just an incomplete pass, 4th and 2, whatever, you can still hand the ball to Chubb or whatever to go get that first down. But for me, for what the Browns are trying to do, one, I've heard all kinds of arguments with this. The fact of the matter is, everybody in the stadium was expecting it to be a handoff, especially the Ravens. Marcus Peters had been beaten twice in this game, including once already on the drive with the deep ball to Donovan Peoples-Jones. They had, 50-yard pass to Amari Cooper early. It had been something they had been able to do. One of the pushbacks I get, well, what about the clock? I get it. Your priority, though, has to be score points. It's to take the lead. You worry about the clock after you've gotten the lead, or in the process of being very confident you have the lead. Jacoby Brissett can do a lot of things. I cannot immediately think, and having watched this season, I cannot go, yep, chalk it up. Easy money here. We're going to score. And it's just a matter of how much clock we can run in the process. You don't have that luxury. You got to take the shots where you can get them. And, all of this, everything that the Browns do, I look through the lens of what are they trying to do in terms of sort of build this thing up for the eventual successor. And to me, I look at this and a lot of the things they've done this season. One, you're paying Amari Cooper $60 million over 3 years. He's very good. Let's not avoid him. He's a player, but it's also about Deshaun Watson is watching this and going, yes, I want the ball. Let me go win the game for you. And they gave him that shot. It didn't work because of the penalty. That's the only reason it didn't work. Everything about that is great. You went to the line of scrimmage going, we're getting two bites of this apple. As a result, you're empowered to go aggressive 3rd down and come back and go on forward on 4th down. So I love all of it. I can live with the offensive pass interference call. It's not the end of the world to me, especially in the season we're in. This is a learning process, as much as people don't want to hear that. So I'm totally in favor. Where are you at on this?
Yeah, I did not mind the play call at all there. Couple things that come to mind of just how this fan base is talking about play calling this season. It's always a massive topic, but it's been a really big topic this year. And I think people think that when a play doesn't work, it means it was the wrong call. And that is just not the case. It might still have been a good play call to make, or one of a number of options that would be a great option. And for whatever reason, in this case, pass interference, it was not successful, but that doesn't mean it wasn't a good call still. And look, I love Nick Chubb more than anyone out there. I think he is the best running back in the league and has had a lot of success this season. But giving the ball to Nick Chubb is also not like 100% success rate, like some people make it seem like it might be. Even on third down, we've struggled to convert those over time as well. So like you said, when the other team is expecting you to give the ball to Nick Chubb in those situations, maybe you do need to try something else. And like I said, that is no shade to Nick Chubb. Like, he is an incredible running back. But that is not, just because you give it to him on 3rd and 2, that does not mean you convert it. It still has a likely chance of not working out in that situation because the defense is going to be prepared for that. And the one other thing that comes to my mind of trying to take the lead there is you're playing the Baltimore Ravens, who have the best kicker in the league in Justin Tucker. Yes. And taking a lead would have been huge there, rather than just, going down, tying it up or whatever, and then having them just be able to, go a little bit down the field, have Justin Tucker kick, and we're kind of out of it at that point. So I think that's another thing that had to be considered in this game that maybe you don't always think about with other teams because of how talented he is.
No, you're absolutely right. We're talking about the difference between a tie versus a 4-point lead. A 4-point lead is out of Justin Tucker's range. Mm-hmm. The other pushback you get as well, if you give him back the ball with that much time, the Ravens are just going to go right down the field. I guess that's certainly a possible outcome. They had their timeouts. They had clock. It was the best performance we've gotten out of this defense. At that point in the game, Lamar Jackson had 94 the team had 94 net passing yards. He had 120, I think, just him. But the 3 sacks were for negative 24 yards or whatever it was. They just hadn't done all that much. Like, yeah, you're sort of, I understand the thought process. You don't trust this defense and you're worried about the Ravens. Okay, but you have to have the lead first. And ultimately they didn't get it. So it didn't matter. So your first priority, get the lead. And at this point, like you said, 4 points is a hugely important factor. You get that, then you can worry about the clock. And again, I look at this and I go with Deshaun Watson, who to me, and I don't know the man personally, nor do I really want to. I have to imagine that he looks at this and goes, I cannot wait to play for this offense, because there are so many plays where he can look at and go, with all due respect to Jacoby Brissett, he goes, I make that play. Or missed open last week against the Patriots, where you're sitting there going, watching that, whether it's Anthony Schwartz or Amari Cooper run wide open down the field, you're going, yeah, I make that play. That's what I want him to feel like when he comes back and into next season, where you're sitting there going, yeah, it's a big, big difference between Jacoby Brissett and Deshaun Watson, off-field issues aside. To me, I believe the Browns are 6-1 if we have Deshaun Watson playing in the game. And, food for thought, had the 6-game suspension initially been upheld, this would have been Watson's first game back, which is just something interesting to debate about. That is not to suggest in any way that I'm anti the 11-game suspension. I think he could have gotten 100 games and it wouldn't have bothered me, but it's just something to sort of add into the mix. Now, carry it over into that. And what has been baked into every game this season is the subject of carries for Nick Chubb, which just makes me want to throw up, because one, it's focusing on so narrowly on one particular aspect that it ignores everything else that's going on. One, I think the Browns sports science department and just studying data for he's in year 5 or 6 now, they have a good sense of when and where he wears down. The other part of that, and it's been why he is in his best year ever right now. He has gotten better literally every year he's been in. There has been no sign of slowdown or anything else, which is exactly what we want. And even though you sort of look at his contract and go, well, he's only here for another year, I don't think the Browns think of it that way, because if they did, I think they would have changed their approach and said, we're going to run him into the ground. For whatever reason, they are very protective of him, which I certainly enjoy. I think Nick Chubb sort of appreciates. I think he likes the prospect of walking correctly for the rest of his life. But the other part of that, who's never complained about carries? Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb has never said, no, give me the ball more. I think he sort of gets it. I think he likes the process. I think does that mean there are situations where he should probably get the ball a couple more times? There's a play call here or there where we all disagree with. Sure. If there's a play call I want to drill down on and go, what is this? It's 2 plays earlier, 1st and 10, and they go with the shovel pass. I understand the concept here. The Ravens are a heavy man team. You're saying that this linebacker is probably going to fly out with the back faking it, and it's going to open things up. Okay, but the first time you did that was with Njoku and a short yardage situation, which is usually what shovel passes are for. And this was on 1st down and 10, and you go shovel pass to Harrison Bryant. And I really like Harrison Bryant. I just don't know if I like Harrison Bryant there. That's almost one of those situations where if you could do it, put both backs on the field. I think at this point it was just Hunt, sort of on that selling the pitch outside. If you do that, put Chubb, sell him out there and pitch it inside to Hunt, perhaps something along those lines. That is one of those situations where I go, this is too cute. Now I can say that and look at it and go, okay, they got to 3rd and 2. They got the great look they wanted. We're in position to win the game and really have, everybody. It's the difference between everybody going, oh, Kevin Stefanski's bad in late game situations and him going, oh, look at onions. Look at the brass ones he's got because he's aggressive when he's just doing what he's always done. It's not really changed anything. So I never get too caught up in carries. I certainly don't get caught up in that Patriots game. Daryl Ryder watched the Bears Patriots game. Oh, they ran the ball super successfully. Why didn't the Browns do that? I watched the game. I imagine Abby watched the game and you probably saw the same thing I did. The Browns got their ass kicked up front. There was no running room. Who were consistently put behind the sticks. That was the entire game plan for them. Took that away from them. Just sitting there and going, well, you have to have this many carries is stupid. Granted, you do go into games a lot of times saying we want to have this many touches, but the game flow and all these other things that sort of impact that change how that works. But ultimately, Nick Chubb is still carrying the ball more than ever. Mm-hmm. He's also carrying the ball effectively more than ever. These are the things you want. These are it's such a narrow complaint. To me, it is in the same realm of what we've been dealing with lately is people complaining about Kevin Stefanski's body language when they're losing. I don't care how he looks when they're losing if it's not fiery enough for you. I just want him to win. Right.
Well, yeah. And I think Nick Chubb understands that in order for him to be able to perform as effectively as he has been performing, the other parts of the offense have to be working as well. So you can't just expect to give the ball to Nick Chubb all the time and have him run for the same amount of yards per play each time because the defense is preparing for it differently. So the fact that, we have gotten the passing game going at different times, I think Nick Chubb appreciates that because it allows him to be more effective and for defenses to have to prepare for this team differently and not just, be prepared to give the ball to Nick Chubb on every play and be able to stop that, which, teams do at certain times when they do come in with that game plan and are prepared for it.
Sure. And look no further than the red zone where the Browns struggled. And that's the thing. You look at a situation like this, you go, the 15-yard penalty, that's why this didn't work. You you rewind back to, I think it was the Chargers game. And maybe I'm wrong, thinking the wrong game. They're down in the red zone, Falcons game. They're in the red zone. It's second down from the 1 yard line. They try to go to Chubb. Wyatt Teller gets called for a holding penalty. They move back 10 yards. They try to throw a screen. It doesn't work. But nobody's sitting there going, well, you shouldn't have given the ball to Nick Chubb on the and one play. It was the right call. Just like this is the right call. The penalty is just an unfortunate outcome that just comes with it. And that's, to me, those are situations that are comparable. In both situations, ultimately the play didn't work. In the game where Wyatt Teller was called for a holding, the Browns had to settle for a field goal. In this game, they had to settle for a field goal. Mm-hmm. Now, special teams. Since we're talking about said field goal, people want to fire everybody midseason, and I have not liked Mike Prefer since he got here, but I still think it's ultimately unproductive to fire somebody midseason. It just makes everybody's jobs harder. Right. Do you know offhand who the assistant special teams coach is that would take over?
Nope.
I had to look it up. It's Stephen Bravo Brown. was the assistant guy, which is most likely who then takes over. And then they find some staffer to assist him. It just makes everybody's jobs harder. And ultimately, my issues with Prefer, yes, some of it is execution. Ultimately, my issues with Mike Prefer are philosophical. I hate how aggressive they are on kick return because they suck at kick return. And like this past week, they try to kick return and be aggressive with it, and they get knocked back with a holding penalty. You also expose yourself to potential injury with that, as we saw last year with Anthony Schwartz gets knocked out with that hellacious. I don't think I saw a worse hit all year. He goes out for several weeks, and the return is nothing. Like I think last year it worked out to be they were getting 0.1 yards more per kick return than they would be if they just took the touchback. Likewise, because the Browns are so bad at punt return, I get it when Chester Rogers is active, he's fine. But when they don't, and Donovan Peoples-Jones is back there, you're effectively in a safe punt return situation. He should basically wave his hand as soon as the ball is kicked and go, I'm fair catching. So if that is who you are and you're not good at punt return, I would think that would say, hey, if we're not getting anything out of this, let's try to block it a lot, because if nothing else, we might stress the punter. We might get bad punts from the said punter. In this case, it's a rookie. Now, that Jordan Stoutman I think that's who it is. Fourth round rookie can kick the shit out of the ball, but he's a rookie. He may get nervous and make a mistake in a big game. If he shanks one, you get a worse punt, even if you don't block it, or God forbid, you actually do block it. I think they have personnel that's better suited for that type of thing. Guys like Alex Wright, JOK, some of those guys where they have a lot of speed on the field in that front unit, I think they can be a problem with that. So those are things where I sit there and go, philosophically, I do not agree with Mike Prefer. And then we get to the execution piece, where for every Donovan Peoples-Jones trying to advance a kickoff because he's really smart, knows the rule, we get any number of blunders, whether it's a muffed punt, holding, bad penalty, or the fiasco he had. And granted, it's extraordinarily fishy how they called that penalty and everything else with it. But the special teams continue to be a major liability. And it sucks because you play the Ravens, who are every year, or if they are not number one, they are top 3 in special teams. And you go against the Browns and you go, they're not even playing the same sport.
Yeah, there's just like a lack of discipline across the board. And that's especially where those penalties come in. I mean, and those like crush drives, those crush big moments, like it's hard when they're repeatedly happening. But I agree with you. It is really hard to fire a coach mid-season and see some type of improvement from there. I think if anything, it will take next season for that to happen. But yeah, it is frustrating that he hasn't adjusted to, like you said, seeing the guys that he has in front of him and what they are good at and making decisions based on that. And instead saying, let's just keep doing what we're doing, even though it's not been working at this point in time when it comes to returns and things like that. He just continues on and hasn't really thought to maybe try something else that might be a little bit more effective for the group he has in front of him.
Well, I think with kick return, it's like a hubris thing. You're your special teams coach, and touchbacks are really boring. The punt return, I got nothing for it. Blocks are obviously great. You'd be thrilled to block any punt. That's where I'm sort of lost. But I understand the kick return part. I just don't agree with it. You want to be the hero. You want your guy to break a big one and go, hey, this has been great. Right. But I'm thinking last year, I think the longest kick return was like 40, and I could be wrong on that. It might not even be that much. This year, I think they got one pretty good return out of Jerome Ford, but since then it's been not even getting to the touchback line, which is, again, it's just the risk is not worth the meager payoff they're getting. Defensively, this was the best game the Browns have played defensively since either the first half of the Carolina Panthers game or the second half of the Pittsburgh Steelers game. I am heartened by their performance and also irritated. It does really seem like, and there's people like everybody will accuse me, oh, you love Joe Woods, you defend Joe Woods. It is eerie that all of a sudden, after players were called out for professionalism, suddenly everybody knew their shit was on their game and were in the right spots and all this other stuff. That like suddenly they looked like a far more professional football team. You can make of that what you will. I do think there are a number of factors that go into this. This is something I have written about. I do think the Deshaun Watson trade has a big, I don't want to say is the reason for it, but it's a factor. In last year, the Browns, I should say, going from last year to this year, the Browns have actually gotten younger on defense. Last year, they had guys like Malcolm Smith, they had Malik Jackson, they had Troy Hill, they had more veteran players in there that sort of knew their way around. And this year they didn't have that. What makes this so frustrating is last year we dealt with this exact same thing. Last year, Malik Jackson sort of wasn't as direct as John Johnson, but made it very clear. He talked about how you have to be, if you're out with your girl, you still got to be thinking about, football. If you're, at home doing whatever, you got to be thinking about how you got to get, that consistent focus. Now, at the time, the offense was really, not doing terribly well. So it didn't feel like it was really directed at the defense. A year to the day later, John Johnson on the exact day brings up the same thing. And now you're sitting there going, are we sure Malik Jackson wasn't talking about the defense last year too? The results were obviously better on defense last year, but to then look at this year and you go, it's weird that all of this comes out. No, John Johnson is probably not the messenger you wanted. And I'm fairly sure that the leadership council probably didn't want to go this route, but John Johnson sort of, ripped the Band-Aid off there and exposed it and then forced, the elder statesman of the team, Joel Batoni, to largely confirm it. I don't want it to have to work like this. And I think it's very temporary. I don't think this is a well you can keep going back to. Ultimately, it's just going to lead to divisiveness and finger pointing, and everybody's going to look at John Johnson and go, you are not doing that well. Shut up. So those are the things where you look at this and you go, it's the Ravens. They're more engaged. They look more professional. Suddenly some players that had not been playing well looked better. But anyway, going back to the Deshaun Watson thing, you make that trade. The free agency thing sort of dries up. One, players don't want to sign here in part. This still also goes back to Baker Mayfield mess. But you make the trade with Deshaun Watson. All these potential free agents are sitting there, other than Jadeveon Clowney, who's like, no, I'm going here, are basically going, I don't know what's going to happen to Deshaun Watson. The Browns, I might like the Browns if he's available for a full season, but I don't know what his status is now. They go sign elsewhere. Meanwhile, the Browns are sitting there going, well, we don't want to spend a whole lot of money to bring in free agents on that side of the ball. So you end up with sort of losing some of those veterans. They are not replaced. You end up with a much younger group, less people sort of being out there and holding people to account. Again, ultimately, this becomes a personal responsibility thing. You have to be a professional. And that's why I can't simply dismiss it as being naive this year, because they had this experience last year. That is where I'm thrilled that they played better against the Ravens. They did a lot of good stuff. It was not perfect. There were some really ugly plays, but the defense played really well for the most part. And I sit there and I go, hey, I remember that, JOK. Hey, there's a lot of these guys who look pretty good doing this. In addition to some of the rookies like Martin Emerson, who's played pretty well. I'm very happy with him and what he's doing. And clearly the Browns are too, and not terribly happy with Greedy Williams as he barely plays. It's a tough spot. And you want to be encouraged, but you're sitting there going, do they really get it? Or were they sort of called out? And maybe there's some element of just, they had lost confidence, and sort of being challenged in this way sort of allows them to do it. And maybe this could build some momentum. But if they come out flat against the Bengals on Monday night, we're sort of back to square one. They have to carry it over. And obviously a win would help.
Yeah. I mean, it is concerning that, like you mentioned, 2 years in a row now that these comments are making it to the public, because you have to wonder, how much has to go wrong behind the scenes to get to the point where these comments need to be made public in the media for everyone to know that things are not going well and that guys are not committed to what they are doing. Like you said, it is a really young group. So in that way, it's not surprising, but it's certainly frustrating that this is a issue that is continuing to happen for the second year in a row. Same issues are happening, but it was promising to watch this week. Frustrating that it took this long. JOK, was kind of drafted as like people always said, the Lamar Jackson stopper. And he ended up being the highest graded player on the team by PFF this week. So it was good to see him return to his form of last year, because it was unfortunate to kind of see the step back he had taken this year, which I don't think is all on him, because his success kind of revolves around the people around him also doing their jobs, like the defensive tackles.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to put that all on JOK, but it was, unfortunate to see that step back in general. So for him to have the game he did, it does make me feel like maybe this defense could have turned a corner. But like you said, just one game. We got the Bengals coming up here. Tough offense, even though we've kind of owned them the last couple of years, still need to come to play, because if it goes back to what it was, I mean, their performance against the Ravens really means nothing changed and nothing has moved forward.
Right. Like, and I don't want to pick on JOK because it was hardly him, but like
right.
Jordan Elliott and Tommy Togiai have not been able to play dead this year. I saw at least something that resembled a pulse up front. I saw more penetration from them. I saw some more things that resembled football out of those two guys. I saw a much better performance. Like, people are probably going to be critical of Grant Delpit because like the holding call, which he did not hold on. And some of those, he played much better in that game. Like, and that's the part where you sit there and you look at it, and Greg Newsome's another player. I don't really think of him as sort of a drop off, but he has not played as well as he did last year. I think some of that can be blamed perhaps on having him do so much. I'd be curious to know, if I'm in the building with the coaching staff, how do they feel like maybe they regret putting so much on him in terms of being a boundary corner and then also sliding into the slot. And ultimately, I think he will be good at those things, but it's a lot for a second-year player. And I think there's an argument to be made that it's just he's overloaded and it's taken him a while to sort of adjust. JOK, like you mentioned, defensive tackle play is critical for him to be successful, but he was also playing downhill better. He was also being more aggressive, better in terms of tackling and fits. So you hope that you get some momentum. You hope that some things happen. And like Martin Emerson played well in that game. Alex Wright had a couple of big plays. Now they were unblocked, but I'm going to take them. I'm going to roll with that success. Myles Garrett is, there are people who still do not understand and think he's not good when he's playing the best football of his career with the shoulder injury, like playing football that is not seen. Like, people who I've seen people suggest that he's not in the same league of the Bosas, which, by the way, they never play. They're always hurt. The Zabat and the Tomax and Zaymot of the NFL are always hurt. And it's always when one gets hurt, the other immediately gets hurt. That TJ Watt is better. And, there's an argument. I would say Cameron Hayward does a lot to sort of allow him to TJ Watt is a phenomenal player. But I think there's some help there where Myles Garrett's doing it himself. He's facing the most double teams ever, or not ever, but facing the most double teams in the league and still killing people. Just unbelievable. As I said, as I've said any number of times, for people like you who watched LeBron James when you were like 8 and could not take your eyes off him, that is how I watch the Browns defense. I just watch Myles Garrett because he's that good. So we'll see. And it's troubling to me. It's tough. You want Myles Garrett to be who he is. It's slightly concerning to me, and it's not because I'm concerned for Myles. I'm concerned for the Browns, in that he basically said to the effect of, yes, I'm going to be a leader, but I'm not always going to be a vocal leader. Someone has to take that role. Obviously, losing Anthony Walker was a big loss on that. John Johnson clearly wants to be that guy. And unfortunately, it's clear he does not have the credibility. And it's clear, I won't say it's clear, but it at least looks like players do not think he has the credibility to own that role. I think the Browns are hoping that JOK and Greg Newsome are those guys that can sort of grow into this. And that this is where you sort of look at the situation of the season. You say to yourself, things are not going well. They're 2-5, but this is something that could come out of this. So let's say the Browns rally as they did last year and they play better defense the rest of the way, or most of the rest of the way. If they rally, is it because JOK and Greg Newsome or somebody else, players of that ilk, are then taking over and going, no, we're going to run this and we're going to make sure that there's a standard. We're going to uphold that standard. We'll see. But bigger picture, for people who are freaked out about the defense, clearly what the Browns are going to do going into next year is they're going to get rid of the children, and there clearly appear to be some children, and they're going to bring in some veterans, which, again, this is where that Deshaun Watson thing is. I think because they got him, it sort of deferred that a year, that they're going to bring in more adults in the form of proven veterans to bolster this defense and get it where it's going. Adding to that, I will defend Joe Woods on this. Joe Woods is really, really damn good coming up with game plans against the division. And I want to say, like, between this year and last, for all the division games, like, opponents are averaging basically 20 against, a talented Ravens offense. And obviously last year they were very injured, but he shut down the Bengals offense. That was, like, if you were to say the crowning game plan of his tenure with the Browns, it'd be last year's Bengals game. He defended the Steelers pretty well. So, yeah, I mean, like, there are a lot of things where people will criticize Joe Woods, and ultimately he may end up replaced, or some of his assistants may end up replaced. But this is, when they play division, those are the games you really have to win. He's been very good at coming up with game plans, and he frustrated the crap out of Lamar Jackson. Again, Lamar Jackson, and obviously it's not just the Browns, but, like, for 3 weeks, the first 3 weeks of the season, as it always is, everybody goes, give him $500 million guaranteed or whatever the number is. And then all of a sudden that stops happening because, one, he starts getting nicked up and teams start to adjust and force him to do things that make him uncomfortable. But if you look at just the Browns game, like I said, 120 passing yards, and I think he had like 60 rushing yards, maybe something like he did not have that Lamar Jackson game. Like the touchdowns that they got, their field goal was set up by that big punt return the Browns gave up. And the fumble, Jacoby Brissett's fumble, set up a touchdown. That's 10 points right there. But just in terms of yardage, the Browns were really, really good. They held them to, I think, 4 yards per play or less than that. The run defense, which has been really highly criticized. Yes, they had 160 yards rushing, but it was 3.6 yards per attempt. They ran the shit out of the ball to get to that number. So I get it. Like, I'm not going to convince people who feel the need to fire Joe Woods, because even you look at last year and you go, hey, Greg Newsome was phenomenal as a rookie. JOK was tremendous in his rookie year. The players get all the credit. And then this year, when they're not playing as well, it's entirely Joe Woods' fault. There's not a middle ground where you can say, hey, maybe Joe Woods really put them in position to succeed as rookies. And maybe in year two, there's sort of, the opponents who have coaches that get paid have figured some stuff out.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point that, like, the defense would be more concerning this year if they had already made the moves to bring those veterans in. Like you mentioned, that they will most likely do next season when Deshaun Watson has a full season and they're really making a go for it. The fact that it is such a young team and even younger than they were last year makes me less worried about the future. But still, obviously, you don't like to see them play the way they have the last few weeks. But in general, I do think if those couple of guys, like you mentioned, JOK, Greg Newsome, next year, they're in year 3, a little more confidence, can be more of those vocal leaders that we're really missing at this point. Because Miles, like you said, it has made it pretty clear he's not always going to be that guy. It's not really in his personality and who he is. If a couple of those guys that are going to be, further into their career can really start to step up, we make a couple of acquisitions in the offseason that bring in some of those veteran leaders and those more vocal teammates, then I think you see a completely different defense out there than we've seen this year in the same system even. Yeah.
And look, it's the same deal. Like, there are a whole lot of players who probably don't like Deshaun Watson personally, but they understand what he does for them financially. He makes them money. The Browns become far more interesting to free agents and are more willing to take less money. You're more able to get the guys the Browns really need, which are those proven veteran defensive linemen who are sitting there going, yeah, I'll take a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal or whatever. Come in, you upgrade the unit very quickly. That's really all they need. You're always going to try to keep adding DBs. They're going to have to continue to try to find an answer at middle linebacker, whether that's Anthony Walker having a fantastic recovery and coming back as a free agent. If it's Deion Jones, finding, the fountain of youth in terms, not really for him, he's not an old man, but for his shoulder. Right. If it's that, or if it's a draft pick, or if it's another free agent, like those are the things you can focus on. Maybe they bring in another safe. Well, one of the things I wanted them to do this year was upgrade their safety depth. I think that has sort of been a problem in terms of being able to do some things, but I do think that becomes a major way to upgrade the defense in a hurry. I think, and I've said this before, I think the Browns made a bad bet, basically going, they brought in Taven Bryan was a shot. They took a shot on Taven Bryan. He made like $4 million, 1-year deal. He's super young. He's a former first-round pick. The Browns love to do that. Mm-hmm. And basically said, look, we're going to see if he can do it. If he can't, we'll move on. If he can, great. I think he's still better suited to be a sort of a third defensive tackle or a fourth defensive tackle than a starter. He may or may not be back, but if he is, it probably won't be for as much money as he's making now. Maybe they move on. But I think just in terms of how quickly you can upgrade this unit, whether it's with Joe Woods or someone else, or if it's just changing out some of his assistants, that's fine. So Kevin Stefanski. Kevin Stefanski continues to take a beating as a coach, and it drives me insane, because if we were to look at this and talk about, Abby, what would you say the most important thing you want from a head coach of the Cleveland Browns would be?
Winning.
All right, fair enough. To me, I would say the answer to that is maximizing the quarterback position. If you were going to say the number one thing, most important aspect of coaching in the NFL right now is getting the quarterback position right and being able to maximize it.
Andrew Berry has also made that very clear that he knows that's the case too. He's said that in, interviews in the past, that the number one thing you need to do is figure out your quarterback position and maximize that before you can even figure out how everything else is going to work. So definitely agree with that. So
2020, if you don't like Baker Mayfield and you want to try to revise history and say he sucked, then you have to give Kevin Stefanski a ton of credit, because he apparently made a terrible quarterback a top 10 quarterback that year. Or if you don't want to say top 10, it's top 15 at worst. He was really good in 2020. And I still remember people earlier this year trying to make Jacoby Brissett better than Baker Mayfield. He's not, but whatever. If you don't like Baker Mayfield and you say, he always stunk, you have to give Kevin Stefanski credit, even if you're like me and thought Baker was really talented. I still believe he was really talented. We'll see where his career goes from now with his shoulder and everything. But he was really good. And Kevin Stefanski made him better. Now you fast forward to this year and you take Jacoby Brissett, which all of us were thinking, oh God, the offense is going to be dreadful. And we're now, our frustration isn't with Jacoby Brissett stinks. It's more along the lines of Jacoby Brissett is missing plays that are schemed open. And we're sitting there going, we're leaving a ton of points on the field. And then he does make plays. He's still, you and I talked about this the last time you were on this. Jacoby Brissett needs to have a career year for the Browns to have a shot. Mm-hmm. He's having a career year, if only slightly better than his best previous year, his first go around with the Colts, but he's playing as good, if arguably the best football of his career. Jacoby Brissett, if you were just picking guys, would not finish above 25 or 30 out of quarterbacks. And one of the major complaints I get is that people are mad that the Browns are not beating bad quarterback play. It just completely ignores the fact that Kevin Stefanski is getting, at the very least, average, if not pretty good quarterback play out of a guy that, if he was not on the Browns, would be bad quarterback play. Granted, the offensive line is obviously a key component in that, but in terms of just, if you watch the games, or if you're sick like me and you go back and watch the games and you see all these things that they're doing offensively and how many times things are schemed open, you're sitting there going, Jacoby Brissett missed the open receiver, or the commentators pointed out, whatever, then you have to be able to go, okay, he's making the quarterback play on this team better. They are getting the most out of Jacoby Brissett possible. I don't think anyone is going to look at that season and go, well, he didn't use Jacoby Brissett right, because Jacoby Brissett has had any number of moments where you go, wow, that was actually pretty damn good. I did not expect Jacoby Brissett to do that, including against the Ravens. I mean, he threw for, they had 5 sacks for negative 35 yards. Even if you include that into his passing total for team net yards, they're averaging 7 yards per pass compared to Nick Chubb, who's averaging 5.7 yards per run. We're going to live with that all day long when Brissett is able to outperform just by dropping back to pass Nick Chubb. So if you then take that and you go, he got the most out of Baker Mayfield, he got, or at the very least more out of Baker Mayfield, he got the more, if not the most, out of Jacoby Brissett. And you sit there and go, they traded all these assets, all this stuff to get a quarterback who is unquestionably more talented than both of them. What is that going to look like? Again, you mentioned it. Andrew Berry focuses on it. And just looking at the league, you have to get the quarterback position right. Matt Rule is fired because he did not get that position right. Right now, the Pittsburgh Steelers are frustrated and their players are complaining about their offensive system because it's not getting the quarterback right. Like, if you were to replace Kevin Stefanski, you then have to, I cannot tell you how fast people could be complaining about, oh, right, we were really good with a quarterback before and now we're not. Like, it's not an easy thing to do. How many offensive coordinators have we had on this team that just weren't unsuccessful or whatever? So to me, that is the most important thing. And it makes everything pale in comparison. You can complain about some play calls. You can complain about game management or not kicking a field goal here or there. You can complain about the defense. Obviously, staffing is important. Who he picks to be his assistant coaches are important. And you'll get people who go, well, he should be fired because of Joe Woods and Mike Prefer. Okay, but I'd also point out Bill Callahan, Chad O'Shea, Stump Mitchell, and all the guys you have on that offensive staff that are like a fantastic staff on that side of it. I'd also point to Mike Tomlin has had an offensive coordinator, any number of them, that their fan base is absolutely hated. Blame Canada gif every week as you're watching that offense with Matt Canada running it, or the Ravens, who every year it's complaining about how limited their offense is under their coordinator they've had for years and years and years. Now, both those head coaches have Super Bowls, all this, but nobody's sitting there going, well, they aren't fixing this, so they need to fire them. Yeah. You have to apply that same logic to Kevin Stefanski. And yes, assistants can ultimately get you fired. I get it, but it's year 3. We're not there yet. And we're especially not there in a year with, at best invented expectations about making the playoffs.
Yeah. And kind of going back to like how great he has made Jacoby look, like for the majority of games, Jacoby has, like you said, had one of the best seasons of his career. And the games have been so close and have at times been decided on Jacoby turning the ball over, which is something we didn't quite necessarily expect him to do as much as he has this year. But if those specific plays don't happen, I think the larger conversations around Kevin Stefanski are totally different because of the results of the games. And the way people are speaking about him as a play caller is totally different too, because we would be winning more and people would look at it differently. But it's just funny, as soon as you lose, people just want to jump and blame the coach and blame the play caller when there's other factors at play, including the way that these devastating turnovers have happened at like really crucial times in a lot of these games.
Yeah, you go back to Deshaun Watson. Like, if he's playing, I think the Browns are 6-1. Maybe you can make the argument they're 5-2. Either way, we're not talking about firing the coach. We're sitting there mad, understandably, fairly mad about the defense and special teams. That's fine, but you're not firing you're not firing the head coach over it. You're sitting there, go, okay, figure out the assistant part of this or improve upon it, whatever it is. The other weird complaint I keep seeing or getting or whatever, the combination of the two, is one of two things. One, Kevin Stefanski's a really good offensive coordinator, but he's not a good head coach. And Kevin Stefanski should give up play calling.
Yeah, I don't get that.
Can you put those two things together for me? Because I cannot.
It makes no sense, because like play calling is what he is best at. So if you take that away, I'm not sure like why you hired him in the first place. Like that is what he is good at and what he in theory was like really brought here to do. So no, I cannot make any sense of those comments because quite frankly, I don't know what people think would be different if you have someone else calling the plays in this exact same system. It's not going to change very much.
Well, and the thing that I will continue to say is he's not calling all the plays. He's just not.
Right.
Alex Van Pelt and Chad O'Shea and some of those other guys are heavily involved. Yep. If you're in that game, Kevin Stefanski is not sitting there talking to the offense for the entire time the ball is on defense or in a special team situation. He's clicking over to talk to those guys or listen to those guys, listen to what's going on. So he understands what's going on. Then he's clicking back over and going, okay, what do you got for me? Or what are we thinking of doing here? And Alex Van Pelt is at that point is effectively calling plays, and Kevin Stefanski is literally just relaying the plays.
Right. That
is absolutely a part of this thing. It is a collaborative process in terms of who's calling the plays. So if you're sitting there going, well, Kevin Stefanski's a crappy play caller or whatever, however you want to phrase it, the reality is I doubt Alex Van Pelt is doing that much. Is there some element where he's going to have his own little flavor on it? Maybe. Are there going to be some different tendencies when he does it? Sure. But the other part of that is while the week is going on and Kevin Stefanski is in all these meetings that people don't think he's in, like defense or whatever, Alex Van Pelt and those other guys are working on the game plan. They're coming up with all what they want to run, what they want to focus on, where they want to attack, all these things. It has Alex Van Pelt's fingerprints and the rest of that staff all over it every week. So if it's not Kevin Stefanski, let's say Kevin Stefanski doesn't do it at all, which has happened in preseason games, it all looks the same, or at least there's only so much that's going to change. There's some situational play call, sure, but ultimately that's fine. I mean, in the same way, if Alex Van Pelt was the play caller, he might do what Mike Tomlin has done at points where he goes, no, we're not doing this. We're doing this, and calls his own play because he's the head coach. That's his job. But I have tried, I'm still trying to get people to understand that, yes, Kevin Stefanski is ultimately going to tell you he's the play caller. And part of that, maybe you can make some weirdly contrived argument about ego, but ultimately it's because he wants nobody else to get blamed for anything. He's always going to put it on himself, which is fine. That, that's sort of being a leader in that scenario. What you don't want to have happen is get into a situation where he goes, no, that was Alex's call.
Yeah.
And it's bad or whatever. And then you get in this whole thing where now every week they're getting a million questions as to which guy actually made the call. So it's always going to be, I made that call. If it's wrong, It's on me. People
get very mad at him for his press conferences and the level of accountability he takes, but I don't think they realize the opposite of that is him calling everyone else out. Like, I think it's smart the way he handles things, and that's what makes him the leader that he is handling it with the respect that he does for the rest of his guys.
It's interesting you mentioned the word accountability, because to me that word has lost all meaning in terms of how Browns fans use it. The only people Kevin Stefanski let's put it this way. Kevin Stefanski does not have to be accountable to A, media, or B, fans. He has to be accountable to the team and what the best interest of the team is and his locker room. That is all. So as long as he's honest with them and brings a consistency to them so they know what to expect from him, then he's doing his job. I have no doubt that Kevin Stefanski will go in there and say, if he's, did something wrong, as he does, if he was willing to do it in the media, I'm sure he's willing to do it in front of his players and go, I screwed this up. This wasn't a good play call by me, while also getting into it and saying, we got to fix this, and this, and getting all the mistakes players are making. Like this notion of accountability, which translates into, if you either win or we fire people, it makes no sense on its face. And that's not how it works. You are accountable only to the people who are in the team, who are on the team, who are in that building. That's where you sort of get that whole bunker mentality. That's it. As long as they are accountable to each other in that concept, in that sense, then he's going to get that respect. And you want him to be a consistent messenger. this is where I hate where we get in this process of like people wanting to be, what amounts to be acting, and they want him to play a role like he's a movie coach, rather than just being who he is, because you think that's going to make, that'll make you feel better as a fan for about 5 minutes until they lose next week, that he was yelling and screaming in this because, it's fired up and it bothers him. And you go, that makes me feel better because that's what I want to do to the players. The players have an expectation of who he is. And if he does those things that are out of character and just not who he is, then they're going to immediately see through it and think he's fake. There are any number of coaches, and how many Patriots assistants have gotten themselves basically destroyed outside of New England because they've tried to be Bill Belichick rather than who they are. And they've all failed doing it that way, as opposed to being authentic. Now, maybe they would have failed anyway, but that's a big part of it. You don't need to be someone you aren't. Yes, players want expertise. They want competence as a coach. They want you to put them in the best situation possible. But really what they want to know the second they walk in the door, what are the expectations here? What am I supposed to be doing on a given day that, am I getting yelled at arbitrarily and it's giving me mixed messages and I'm not sure what you want. Ultimately, I'm not listening to you, or I don't trust you, or whatever. That's where you run into a problem. This notion of play acting as a coach doesn't make any sense. And if you played sports and you had coaches, I guarantee you hated that crap when it happened to you, if you ran into that.
Yeah. Oh no, definitely happened. And I think Browns fans want Kevin Stefanski to be like Dan Campbell. Like that's the example I think they see, just because he's been very publicly in the media and with Hard Knocks. People have this idea that like Dan Campbell is, the ideal type personality for your coach to have. And that just doesn't translate to wins. And like you mentioned, that would be so inauthentic for other coaches to all try to be like that. If that's not who they are and what they bring to the table, it only will last for so long before people sniff that out and realize that's not who you are. And you're probably not going to be an effective coach and able to win games if you're not being who you are. And look, I like Dan Campbell's personality too, but I don't need Kevin Stefanski to be like Dan Campbell. That would just be weird.
Well, since you've been making a huge tear on the picks front, what is Dan Campbell's record with the Lions currently?
Oh God. I mean, low.
Yeah, they're 1-5.
Yeah.
And what are Lions fans and media complaining about? They don't like the fact that he's not very good at this.
They had the first pick in the draft last year. I mean, it's like, come on, this is not a great team. And I know they've played in competitive games this year and they've been close a lot of times, but I mean, so have we. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't translate to winning just because you have the fire in you.
Yeah, and it's fine if the Lions players respond to that and they think he's authentic and that's who he is, and that's great.
Right.
But literally, the complaint for them is that they're not very smart. They do dumb stuff, and that's the criticism is he's doing. Some of the stuff I've seen is they think he's reacting too much on emotion and not just thinking things out and making some smart decisions. So like, here's the bottom line. When you lose, it doesn't matter what you do. Yeah. The only thing anyone wants to see is winning. So like getting caught up in like how a guy acts is fine, but it's in particular an issue for them because they had the Hard Knocks thing and all these people are like, oh, maybe the Lions will be a factor and maybe they'll squeak into the playoffs in a very bad NFC. Well, and I guess it's possible they still could just because the NFC is pretty bad, but 1-5 is where they're at. So these are the things where I sort of look at this and go, what do you really want from your coach? The reality is you want what they're getting from it. You just want it to work better in terms of wins and losses. Ultimately, I'm of the belief that if Deshaun Watson is your quarterback, you're going to win a hell of a lot more than Jacoby Brissett. Now, I know, bold, but I think that's a reasonable assumption to make that, again, the Browns have lost 4 games by a combined 9 points. I think Deshaun Watson is worth 9 points in those games. At the very least, if he's not, they wasted a whole lot of draft assets and money on a guy that's not going to make this team effectively better. I think at the worst, they'd be 5-2. I think it more likely 6-1. And we're still bitching about all the things we're bitching about. Although I would point out potentially the defense would be better this year if he was, and not because, obviously they're built to play with the lead and there's some things with that. I also cannot help to think that the Browns defense was doing really, really well in the summer and everybody's really excited in the summer. And I don't think that was illegitimate. I don't think that was sort of misplaced. I do think the announcement and ultimately the punishment with Deshaun Watson may have, I don't think consciously made them lose effort, but I think it sort of, even if fans weren't ready for it, I think it sort of put in perspective just how difficult this year was going to be. And I think it was discouraging in a way that, I'm speculating here, but I think it was a little bit discouraging to be like, man, we, even when it was 6 games and then to 11, I think that was a punch to the stomach that sort of affected these guys. And, then you experience the lack of success. And I think, again, like I said earlier, you lose confidence in some of those other things that can sort of snowball. But I do think that was, again, you look at them, you go, that you're professionals, you shouldn't be react to that, but they are also people. And especially these ones are young. I think that potentially had a bigger impact than anyone would like to admit.
Yeah. I mean, just as our expectations changed when the announcement came out for what this season could be. So it's normal for their expectations to change as well. And I don't want to accuse anyone of not trying as hard, because I know like this is their career and they care a lot about it. But of course, when your expectations are lowered for the other side of the ball, maybe just internally in some ways, your mindset shifts a little, and you're not giving maybe what you would have given had you have thought you had a real legitimate shot at making a decent run in the AFC.
Yeah, I don't think it's, no, I'm blowing this off, although I guess that's possible. I think it's more along the lines of, like you study for a test, you thought you were prepared, then you go on and you bomb it or just not do well relative to where you thought. I think, and again, we talk about some of the veterans. I think having a guy like Anthony Walker sort of makes you, sort of sets an expectation. And some of this is the difference between being a rookie and being a second year guy. You think more. That's one of those things. A little bit of knowledge can be very dangerous. I think it's a little bit of, I really thought I was ready, and I wasn't. And I think you don't want to have to deal with that as a reality check, especially 2 years in a row. And I really don't want to have this conversation again. But I do think those are factors where somebody can feel like they did enough to prepare, and the reality is they didn't. To me, that may be where you can maybe sit there and go, okay, maybe they're naive a little bit, without having that real guidance on what it takes that they might have had in previous years, but just not where they need to be. And certainly something that if they can come out and play well against the Bengals, they can get rolling and play well. And obviously they did that last year. Then you can sort of start to get excited about what this group can be. Maybe they can rally. Beating the Bengals would be obviously a big boost to this team, even though it only makes them 3-5. It just, just like it would have been a big difference between 2-5 and 3-4. It's a big difference between 3-5 and 2-6.
Yeah. Well, and I think just thinking about their mindset in general throughout the course of the season for the defense specifically, like the way we've lost games too, like they start, with a horrible loss in the Jets game, and what that does to your mindset for that to happen in such a horrific way. And then losing in these close games each week. I think it's hard for some of these younger players maybe to move on in the way veteran players who have a lot of experience and, maybe have a better time bouncing back. Maybe that's a little bit harder for some of these younger guys when it's kind of these repeated events happening. Whereas if you're winning, it's a lot easier to kind of build on those things as opposed to what they've been doing.
Right. And looking to the Bengals, it's interesting. The Bengals are not a very good running team, which could be helpful. They've caught their stride passing in recent weeks.
We make bad running teams look like good running teams though sometimes. So
that's true.
First game, I don't want to.
No, I agree. But there's part of me that's like anything that gets the ball out of Joe Burrow's hands is
absolutely
good. So we'll see. Obviously, he likes to hold on the ball too long. If they can we'll see where Jadeveon Clowney is as he continues to rehab. Having him was a boost, even if it was on a pitch count. Myles Garrett's phenomenal. They can create pressure. Maybe they can cause some turnovers. We'll see about Denzel Ward. Obviously, I have no interest in entertaining any speculation about, well, he's not trying to come back from a concussion or anything along those lines just because he got paid a lot of money. if he comes back, that's a boost. If they can continue to get good corner play, I'm very curious to see what Martin Emerson does this week, because one of the things he was sort of, without the Browns saying he was drafted to do, I think was to cover T. Higgins. Big guy covering a big guy, has the physicality to hold up. T. Higgins is a very good player. We shall see on that front. The Bengals defense, they are better than their talent suggests. I think their defensive coordinator is very good at getting more out of that side of the ball. That said, I still think the Browns have the capacity to take advantage of them. Not having Njoku is a big deal that hurts quite a bit. Can they consistently stop the run? I don't know that they can. Can Jacoby Brissett sort of find some opportunities to make plays? I think he will. It wouldn't surprise me if we're back in this type of situation where it's a one-score game. Jacoby Brissett has the ball at the end, and maybe they convert, and then Joe Burrow has the ball in his hands with the drive. But I suspect we're in for another last drive of the game situation to see if it's a coin flip type thing. Do the Browns come out and win this one, or they ultimately lose? That's where we're at.
I'd like to see it look more like the game in Cincinnati last year, which I was actually at, and maybe a Denzel Ward comeback interception on the 1 yard line again. Something like that would be fun to see. Yeah,
I mean, I was also at that game. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, and just the quarterback just absolutely demolishes them. That'd be great. I would love all that. But regardless of how it goes, we will be back next week to talk about it. Big shout out to people who have found us on YouTube. That's been huge for us. I was sort of surprised at how well that has done, but whether it's YouTube or normal podcast thing, as always, like, subscribe, do all that stuff, tell a friend. The more the show grows, that's great. We enjoy, I love doing it. It's a lot of fun to do with Bree. It's always fun to do it with Abby. It keeps us going, keeps people engaged. And I'd like to think that maybe we're reaching a more rational fan base. And some of my ranting and raving is to people who probably already agree, and I'm just beating them over the head with it. But you can always reach out and let us know. In any case, hopefully the Browns will be back with a win. They end this stupid losing streak. They get to 3-5. It becomes more interesting. All that stuff. But either way, we'll be back next week. So thank you for listening, and we'll see where we end up.
Thanks for having me.